years and pretty much have concluded, like for example, a hostage taking is a survivable type thing, that they don't want to hurt you. That changed on 9/11. Because when we look at skyjackings, taking over an aircraft, it gives the bad guys some sense of security because they get to fly around. But nevertheless, ultimately what we found out was the guys didn't care whether they got through it or not. In fact, their mission was to die and to take all the people on board with you. My point being, folks, up here you'll see a slide on things to consider if you're ever in a skyjacking situation. It's basically what it boils down to is your call. You're going to have to determine. I mean, that plane that went down in Pennsylvania, those people, through the use of cell phones and whatnot, had found out what had been going on in Washington, D.C. and New York City, and they realized, hey, this isn't, we're going to fly out to some other country and sit down and negotiate. They're going to kill us, and they stood up. They stood up and they took a stand and they fought, and absolutely they're heroes. Whenever I get on a plane now, one of the things I do is I identify myself to the crew as a military person, and I tell them, you need anything, you let me know. And they like that. Police officers, all these people do that now. Because make no doubt, someone gets up on a plane and starts raising hell, there's going to be about 150 people kicking his ass. Because we're not going to take it anymore, and we just don't know. Air marshals, they're not going to identify themselves, okay? What it says basically up here at the bottom, evaluate the situation, folks. I mean, unfortunately, we have had cases where someone was just a little drunk or had a bad day, and they have gotten their butt kicked just because they were a little rude to the flight crew. We don't want that. I'm not trying to encourage that. I'm just saying you have to evaluate the situation and make the call, because it may not just be, I'm going to hold you for some type of ransom. Okay, assassination, we all know what that is. Another tactic that's used out there. I wanted to put this up here to point out that most of the times a victim of assassination is someone who A, knew there was a threat out there to him and disregarded any of his security measures. Always went the same way to work, always had the same oblivious to what's going on around him type attitude. And another tactic, one we're very, very afraid of, and one you're going to get some more information on this afternoon, is the use of a weapons of mass destruction. Whether it's a chemical, a biological, or radiological, or nuclear type weapon. We've already had some used already. Certainly you remember the anthrax letters that were going around after 9/11. You may recall the Tokyo subway sarin attack by the Shiriko group over there. It has been used, and we have every reason to believe that some of these groups out there we're dealing with today wouldn't hesitate to try to use it if they got their hands on it, could get it into place. So yes, WMD is a big fear. And this is one here that really causes a lot of problems for us, and that's a hoax. That's me as a bad guy. Ain't blowing up anything in a while. Of course, ain't got no money. Well, here, I can throw a quarter in a payphone and call the local government building, the local base, and tell them there's a bomb planted in one of your buildings. In today's world, what are we going to do? We're going to treat it as it's a real threat. We're going to evacuate. We're going to search. It will disrupt your operations. And all it did was cost those people a quarter. Yeah, they committed an act of terrorism on you. They scared you. They disrupted your mission. They hassled you. The thing about it, folks, is, and many of you probably feel this way and know what I'm talking about, when it starts happening and happening and happening over time, what happens to us? We get complacent. We get desensitized. God, just another hoax. I mean, how many times have you saw on the evening news, the Homeland Security Office has raised the national threat level to orange or red, something like that. We haven't seen any difference, ain't nothing happened. What is it? Yes, guard against that, folks. Guard against being complacent, because that's a tactic they will use. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that our top intelligence folks out there are acting prudently off information that our agents and people have collected. But there's also no doubt in my mind that the bad guys are out there saying, hey, watch this, and they're on a cell phone, or they're putting information, communicating with each other, knowing that this information will be collected, and it's going to drive us crazy, because we're going to react, nothing's going to happen. It's all intended for us to lower our guard. Okay, what might cause you to be chosen to be a victim? What could make you, unfortunately, be someone that's on the news? The old saying is, don't be a lamb, be a tiger. Because terrorists aren't going to take on the hard target in most cases. They're not going to go out there and try to duke it out where any of the odds are going to be against them in most cases. Because they want to be successful. Ain't no one going to support, ain't no one going to be afraid of a group who's not successful, who doesn't pull off any successful terrorist acts. So, real basically, there's a couple of different ways that people find themselves becoming victims. Number one, you could be a victim by your location. Wrong place, wrong time. There's not a whole lot we can do about that. We have to live our lives. You know, I had to go down to the DMV this week to get my license renewed and get my vehicle registered, you know. And surprisingly, though, remember it was on the news, the computer shut down? I went the day after. I figured it was going to be just, you know, one of those miserable pack a lunch all day thing. Hour and a half. Amazing. But anyway, that's a place that terrorists know there's going to be a lot of people. So there's not a whole lot you can do about that. What you can do is, though, if you've got threat information for wherever you're at, especially overseas, whatever it is, tensions are rising, then maybe you reschedule. You don't go to these places during peak hours, because you can bet they're going to want to attack the DMV when it's packed, not when there's only a few people in there. Victim by association. Okay, where's the American? You know, we got that bad rep. Of course, it's well-deserved. That loud, ugly American. I mean, we walk into a place, we take over. We're overseas, we are the loudest people there. Victim by opportunity. Again, that's just something easy for the terrorists. So basically, you don't want to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. You just have to use your best judgment given what threat information you have out there. You don't want to walk around wearing that big cowboy hat and that big buckle about this big with them boots. That's right, I'm protected. You don't want to do that. And, you know, again, paying attention to the current security atmosphere, the stuff that's in the news and all that, act accordingly. Okay, so some of the things that you can do out there. Basically, routines. Routines are the most deadly thing for you because the longest period for a terrorist operation is their surveillance and planning. You're going to have one of the OSI people coming to you this afternoon. They're going to talk to you a little bit about surveillance, what to look for, and how to report it. But these folks will. They will sit out there and they will watch you weeks, months, even years in some cases, so that they know what you're going to do more than you do. They watch it. How many of you have ever driven from home to work, got to work, and had absolutely no recollection of the journey? I have. I have all the time. Hell, I don't recall, did that light turn green? Not that it matters in this town, but anyway. My point being is we get into routines and, you know, I know I've got to slow down because of this daggone construction here on Craig Road. Those are the types of things that we identify and we process. But I have no idea who was in the car next to me. I have no idea what the people were doing on the curb there because it's not needed information for my daily commute. Okay? When the threat environment raises, it is needed information. You need to watch for things going on. You need to make sure that you vary your routes. You need to make sure that your family's prepared. You need to make sure that you take into account some of these things. Let me ask you this. Some of you that may have lived in the same spot for a number of years, you know the people on the block. You know, so you're out there cutting the grass, and here comes the white pickup. Oh, that's Joe. You haven't seen Joe yet, but you recognize that truck. It's been 2 doors down from you for the last 4 years. That is you knowing what is normal. And you have to know what is normal because it will help you detect what is not normal. Because the terrorist guy might be the guy sitting across the street, at the bus stop, on your block. Hey, it's a public bus stop, you can do that. But you're sitting there thinking, well, he doesn't live around here. Now, what he might be doing is he's waiting for you to come out, get into your car, and leave. He wants to see the route you're going to take. He wants to see what you're doing. So the suspicious nature of his activity may not be prevalent until after you've gone. That's where you elicit your family. That's where you elicit your friends, whatever the case may be. Again, we're talking, oh, he's paranoid type thing. You apply when the threat is at that appropriate level. Many of you have been overseas. Certainly that is a place where you would want to apply it. But when you've driven away is when the guy folds up his newspaper and walks away and never intended to get on the bus. You know, those are types of things you look at. Some of the things you can do to make sure you don't stand out, besides not wearing the cowboy hat and buckle and the boots and all that good stuff, learn about the culture where you're at. Try to fit in. A lot of groups aren't careful. They don't want to kill their own. Unfortunately, we see on the news the indiscriminate bombing, and most of the time these people are killing their own folks, but they don't care. You know, they chalk it up to it's for the cause. There used to be a saying we had in the military when I was stationed over in England, was that you wanted to wear an American flag if you were going up to Northern Ireland, because the IRA was very careful. They didn't want to kill any Americans because they got a lot of popular support from our country. So that was a case where you wanted them to kind of realize where you're at. It's not always the rule now, and I wouldn't suggest that you try that tactic. But basically what I would tell you is do what you can to blend in. Be sensitive to changes. Now that goes back to you identifying everything that's normal where you're at and then being able to spot the abnormal. Real quick story to tell you how this works. In some of the many schools and seminars I went to, I got a chance to meet with and talk to a guy who was a member of the British SAS, their equivalent to the Special Forces. And he was telling me about a patrol that he was leading through Northern Ireland. And, you know, him and his squad are patrolling down the streets of Northern Ireland. And he said, and you've all had this feeling, the hair raising on the back of your neck. He said he got that feeling, and you know, immediately it was one of these things, freeze. He didn't know why. He just got that feeling, you know, and everybody froze, they took cover and went down. And he sat there and he studied the street for a few minutes. And it just took him a few minutes because he was like, I don't see it, but there's something wrong here. What do you think it was? Bingo. What he didn't see was things that he should have seen. The normal activity. He didn't see it. He didn't see the people out hanging their clothes up on the lines. He didn't see the people sweeping the sidewalk. He didn't see the people going into the shops. The reason he didn't see that is because in most cases the community knows. The community knows, okay? They may have seen the people there the days and weeks before conducting their surveillance. They may have seen the people, you know, acting suspiciously. And they know. Especially up in that situation, they may not be so willing to step forward and warn the security force and all that, but they knew. He picked up on it. Wait a minute. That should be there. It's not. Something's wrong. They withdrew. They called in a bomb squad. Sure enough, about 50 meters up further, there was a vehicle full of explosives waiting for them to cross by it. You have to know what is normal and then be looking out for any changes in that. Unexpected events. Well, hey, that's the what-if game. Your best defense, folks, is to plan accordingly and to check in. Let your family know. And all these things I'm telling you, just like I tell military folks, don't put this in your brain housing group and think it's just for yourself. Go home and tell your family, tell your friends. Again, you're going on vacation. You're going on vacation down to Mexico. Okay? Yeah, there's a threat down there. Those are the things you look for. Those are, hey, okay, we're going to go shopping. If we get separated at 10 o'clock, we're meeting right here at this point. That's the kind of things that you do anyway, probably, with your family and your friends and kids. Okay? It can be effective for countering terrorism. Hotels. Real quickly, because my time's running out. When you're staying in hotels, some interesting things there, because that's a place where people can come and get you. It's not your turf, so to speak. So some considerations when you're traveling abroad, whatnot, and staying in hotels. First of all, choose your hotel carefully. You can go online, read the history, read what's going on there. For us military folks, we say absolutely try to stay on any basis. But if not, in a foreign country, don't pick a hotel that's got a big American flag on the front. It's got the big Statue of Liberty. Those are actual places that I've seen out there. It may seem appealing to you, but it identifies who may be staying there or who may want to stay there. Easy target for the terrorists. Consider changing any pre-assigned rooms. Why we say that is because people on the staff, maybe they may be sympathetic to the bad guys. They've looked at the hotel registry, they see who's coming in. They know Sergeant Bartley character, this guy from the U.S. Air Force is coming in, and he's staying in room 1B. They can share that with their bad guy friends, okay? So what might I do? I might show up and say, you know, I changed my mind. I'd like to stay on another floor. Could you give me another room? That kind of throws a wrench in that plan there they have. You see here, avoiding street level rooms. Well, that's basic security measure. You don't want to be on the street because bad guys can hit you and get out real quick. It is recommended second floor, probably no higher than the 6th or 7th floor. The reason we say that is because fire department response. You know, a lot of places, they may not have all the high-tech tools and all that, and you're up on the 9th floor, it builds on fire, and that hook and ladder only goes up to the 5th. Hey, so those are things to think about there. Keeping the room neat. I got a bad problem with this, but that can work to your advantage. Keep the room neat. Shower curtains, closet doors open. Dresser drawers slightly open. All this is a way for you to quickly identify if someone's been in your room. Someone's going to come through and search your room, they're going to go through them drawers, open it up, they're going to close it all the way. They're not going to notice that you left it this much open. Shower curtains, closet doors, well, you want them open because the bad guy's going to use one of them to conceal themselves. Obviously, it's closed. You walk into that bathroom, the shower curtain's closed. Oh, wait a minute. I don't do that. I leave mine open. Keep your drapes closed, lights on, television on. As you can see up there, you may have to slip the, you know, maid service of 5. Just bring me some towels. You don't need to come and do anything in my room. Your awareness is the key, folks. Your awareness is your key. You're going to hear some things about what to look for certain types of WMD events. In the doctor's office, in that patient in the dental chair, whatever the case may be. You see something that's out of the ordinary, something you've never seen before or not, get on the phone, talk to somebody, find out what's going on. Okay, and that's just me trying to equate in your day-to-day lives how you can use some of this stuff here. Again, if you're traveling overseas, you're going to some other places where there is a terrorist threat and all that, where you've heard some stuff on the media, do your homework. Go online. The internet now is full of so many sources out there for you to get good, reliable information, or the best available to that point on these areas. Homeland Security, the FBI, and many other civilian or private entities out there. A lot of material out there today on the subject of terrorism and things to help you better prepare. And the number one thing, it's not just over there, and it's not just the other guy. Terrorists are not going to come at you screaming praise and Allah with a hood on all the time. Most terrorists, believe it or not, do want to live to fight another day. So they're going to do their best to be successful, to be covert, to hit you and run.
Training other physician assistant students, we have a phase 2 program out here. But I'm also the officer in charge of the in-place patient decontamination team setup that we have out here at Nellis Air Force Base. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that at the end and tell you what kind of capabilities we have out here. I was asked by Dr. Welch to come out here and do this lecture this morning, and he is my orthodontist, so I figured if I didn't, he might tighten my braces a little too tight. So here I am. We are going to go over today signs and symptoms of radiation syndromes. We're going to talk about biological agents, and we're going to talk about chemical agents. Now, these are going to be very brief, very basic topics that we're going to go over, just to give you the nuts and bolts. I do want to mention just something about, we're going to talk about precautions, standard precautions, aerosol precautions. I'm going to leave some handouts on the sign-in desk. I only brought 35. I had no idea this was going to be such a large group, so you guys can fight over them later. And just to go over standard precautions, you guys, I'm sure you're very aware of this, but just to be thorough, is washing your hands after contact with a patient, wearing gloves when you're doing procedures on the patients. You guys do this every day. Aerosol precautions are standard precautions, plus you want to have the individual in a private room with negative air pressure so that they cannot go out into the rest of the wing or the ward. You want to use respiratory protection when you're working right next to the patient. And you don't want to move the patient around a lot so that a lot of the bacteria is aerosolized. There's droplet precautions, which again is standard precautions plus private room or with someone else of the same infection. So you could have a ward where you had droplet precautions. And you just, again, want to limit movement of the individual. And then there's contact precautions, which is also a private room or with someone of the same infection. And then wearing gloves, wearing gowns, that's just kind of the basic precautions which we'll refer to in the slides here. All right. I know you guys have been sitting and listening to lectures, well, just a couple so far this morning. But I know two dentist jokes. I'm going to tell you one I know. One is a husband and wife walks into a dentist's office, and the husband runs up to the dentist. He says, I got a tooth, I need it pulled, I am in a hurry, I don't have a lot of money, I want it out now. The dentist says, wow, you are a brave man. He says, but I need to see the tooth. He says, okay, honey, come here, show me the tooth. Okay. All right, let's start with radiation. There are two scenarios that might be in a terrorist plot. One would be the thing that movies are made of, that is the stolen warheads, the suitcase nukes. I mean, that's just very dramatic. Not very likely. It's just difficult to move radioactive material around the country or between nations. More likely would possibly be a power plant accident where it was sabotaged and there was a poor meltdown. Now, Chernobyl was not a terrorist attack, but I just put that up there to remind you of the terrible things that happened right at the time of the accident and then what's still going on years later. There are going to be two kinds of damage. There's going to be direct biological damage and there's going to be indirect biological damage. Direct damage is when the cells are ionized and they just die. And of course that's incompatible with life. We don't have any cells, we're not functioning. Indirect would be less of a dose, less exposure, where the water in the body is ionized, and this basically just causes the molecules that are damaging and working on those subcellular structures. When there is a radiation leak, the cells that are actively dividing are the ones that will be affected the most. And those are those of the hematopoietic, which is the blood system, and the gastrointestinal system. This becomes a problem a little bit later down the road. Now, acutely, if there's high dose release, let's say there is that detonation, that explosion, you are going to have the acute radiation syndrome. That would be within just a few days you're going to have, or actually very few hours, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. That's your acute phase. Then you're going to have your prodrome phase, which actually is kind of a symptom-free time frame, and then you move into your latent. Generally, three areas that are affected: bone marrow suppression, which causes what we call a pancytopenia. It affects all the cells in the body, all the blood cells. Your white blood cells, red blood cells, causes anemia, affects your immune system. You're more likely to get infections. So, big problem. It goes on to the gastrointestinal system, which affects our body's ability to absorb fluids and dispense of fluids. So therefore, dehydration is a big problem. Diarrhea, vomiting causes us to lose fluids in that syndrome. And then there's the central nervous system and the neurovascular system. This will cause altered memory, altered consciousness, can lead to coma, and ultimately death. Bad news. Now, chronic radiation, this is something you actually might see in the office, something where over a 3-year period of time an individual is exposed to chronic radiation. Maybe they live around where there was a leak or an explosion. Why would somebody want to do that? I don't know. Maybe it was Vegas land and they thought it was cheap and they could buy it up. I don't know. So what you might see is a patient with problem sleeping, appetite changes, concentration, memory, mood disorders. They may just have some very vague headaches, dizziness, hot flashes, just very benign symptoms. That's where your history comes in. If you know that they possibly might live in a radius where there was a radiation problem in the past, you need to ask more questions about in that area. So what do? Remove them from the site of exposure. That makes sense. Most people recover very well if they only get limited exposure and they're removed from the site. Decontamination. Now, let's say that there is the detonation scenario that I mentioned earlier. Basically, the fallout is going to cover the individual's clothing. You can remove 90% of the contaminants by just undressing the patient and washing them. When you remove the clothing, you want to cut it away. You don't want to lift it over their head and fluff it up into the air. Cut it away, less movement as possible, put it in a bag, seal the bag. Wash the person with soap and water. You don't need anything special. Soap and water, and again, that removes 90% of the infected material. Secondary risks of irradiation are very, very minimal. You are not going to get irradiated from a patient who was exposed. Treatment, again, is supportive care, ABCs, and they're going to be very nauseous. There's going to be probably some vomiting, so the antiemetics are important. Okay, so that's nuclear. Let's go on to biologic agents. We're going to talk about 7 different agents today. There are a lot more out there. I mean, they're just a lot, but these are the ones that we are probably the most concerned about. And we'll start with anthrax. It's a zoonotic infection. Had a lot of publicity a couple years ago. It's Bacillus anthracis is the bacteria that causes this. It can be in a vegetative state where it's active, or it can be in a spore form. The spore form is a problem because it can last more than 40 years in soil, so it doesn't go away. It's not something that you put out in sunlight, disappears. So this is why anthrax can be a big problem. Modes of transmission, that's what the MOT stands for. This is something a terrorist might use, would be direct contact. You inhale it, or you can eat it. They can put it in water or food, and you can ingest it. Two kinds. There's cutaneous, which is skin, and inhalation. Cutaneous is about 95% of the cases that we see of anthrax in the world. It's very low mortality rate, only 10 to 20% without antibiotics. Usually you get it from individuals that work with animals because it's carried by animals. And what they'll see is you'll see an elevated lesion. Usually it's a dark color, a black or a dark blue. And the lymph nodes will be involved. They'll have some swollen glands around the site of drainage from where the lesion occurs. Now, big problem with this is self-inoculation. If they have one lesion on their arm, they could put it on their upper arm. So you got to be careful about handling an individual with the actual lesion. You got to be careful of the lesion. Inhalation, a little bit different. As I mentioned, this stuff's hard to get rid of. It takes 1/millionth of a gram of anthrax to be fatal. That's not a lot. Fortunately, there's no person-to-person contact, so you can use just your standard precautions. There's an incubation phase, which lasts 1 to 3 days, or 1 to 6 days, where just kind of general don't feel good. So if they don't know they've been exposed, and they walk into your office, and yeah, I got the flu, you're not going to know. You're not going to be at risk, but they're probably not going to know. Then you move on to the initial phase, where they have more shortness of breath, and it becomes a little difficult to breathe, and they're sweaty, and if we do an x-ray, they have some pulmonary effusion, they have a blue color to their skin possibly from the deoxygenation, meningitis signs, and then the x-ray is very distinctive. There's a widening of the mediastinum, which is center here, and blurring of the heart margins. So it's very, very distinctive, not something you're going to do in your office with little dental x-rays. I don't think we cover that, but that's what we would find. Treatment, it is treatable. Unfortunately, depending on when in the scenario you're actually treating the individual, it's going to decide whether they're going to make it or not. Even with treatment, it can be fatal. Treated with general antibiotics, penicillin, tetracycline, erythromycin. If you are an individual that has come in contact but are not symptomatic, we do treatments with Cipro or doxycycline. If you were in the same office down the hall around the corner from someone who had something in their office, that's what we would put you on. Again, standard precautions. There is a vaccine available. There's been a lot of controversy in the Department of Defense over this vaccine, and it was suspended for a while, but now we're back in use. Okay, botulinum toxin. This is not the actual bacteria that causes the problem, it's the neurotoxins that it produces. Interesting note, you probably have all heard about Botox, and you probably all know that Botox is, made from this toxin, so it's just a different classification. So I think it's type A and B are the two kinds of things now. Modes of transmission that might be used would be to inhale it, to have it in somebody's food or water, or it's in a wound. Symptoms can appear in a day, day and a half, or it could take several days before a patient becomes symptomatic. Symptoms would include they just feel weak, dizzy, sore throat. They can have some problems with vision. Double vision is very common. Problems with light. They're real sensitive to light, and that's, of course, because it's affecting the iris and how it's dilating and contracting. You could see them. They could have like a droopy eye, halitosis. Their mouth might be dry and crusted. That's something you would notice possibly. Or you would say that the muscles of the throat and the tongue were affected, that they just weren't functional as they should be. And of course, we would find altered deep tendon reflexes. Now, how this kills people is it affects the respiration muscles. And if you can't breathe in and out, you don't live very long. So ventilation support is crucial in this. Some people need tracheotomies. There is an antitoxin given as soon as possible. It's very beneficial. Also, you need intense and prolonged nursing care. This could take several weeks. It could be months that this person is incapacitated and unable to breathe on their own. But they will generally return to full function. Our stuff just has to wear off and get out of the system. And there is a vaccine available, and it's generally administered to a certain industrial workers in the United States. Plagues next. Biological warfare has been around a long, long time. Back in medieval times, they used to take the plagued bodies of the deceased in their compound, get their catapult out, and they're pulling it over the walls of their enemy because they wanted to have their enemy die from plague. Well, it wasn't actually the body, because the body cannot transmit the plague. It was the rats that fed on the body and the fleas that sucked the blood out of the rats who developed the infection. The infection grows in the gut of the flea, and they get filled up and kind of bound up, and they have to bite a human. They regurgitate that bacteria into the wound, and the humans get infected. So it wasn't actually the bodies, more so it was the rats and fleas that were already in the compound. So someone would die in the enemy's compound, they'd fling them back over the wall to the other guy. So kind of flinging there. Okay, plague is caused by Yersinia pestis, another zoonotic disease. It could be inhaled, it could be through the vectors, which are the rodents and the fleas, or direct contact. Now, if you are bit by a rat or bit by a flea, you develop bubonic plague. And that is based on the term bubo, which is for a lymph node that becomes enlarged. Very characteristic. I got a picture of that in a second. If you